We're still a couple months away from May, which means that Jon Rothstein is wide awake, especially heading into his favorite month of the year. And he's taken some time to be with us. Jon, thanks so much. I know your time is valuable. You are constantly on the move. So I want to get right to a couple basketball questions and then ask you a couple questions about you, because I feel like in a day and age where every media company is looking for somebody that moves the needle, you have seemingly found a way to do that in college basketball with this rabid fan base that obsessively follows you around. Let's start with the Blue Bloods, who are on the outside looking in of the top 25 right now, North Carolina, Duke, and Kentucky. How surprised are you that Carolina has struggled this way, given what they did last year and the players that they had coming back?
I'm shocked, Carolyn, and I didn't expect North Carolina to seamlessly replace Brady Manick from last year's team that won to the national championship game, but I thought that North Carolina would still have enough to be really good, even if they weren't the exact same team. But North Carolina now enters, obviously, this weekend with only one quad one victory, which means that obviously the highest level of impact wins that the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee will evaluate, they've only earned one victory in that quadrant. So we're not talking about North Carolina now as a potential number one seed like we all anticipated prior to the season. We're talking about North Carolina as a team right now that is fighting for its life just to make the NCAA tournament.
What is ultimately to blame?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, I think the biggest, though, is that the spacing that North Carolina plays with offensively is just vastly different than it was last year with Brady Manick. Brady Manick emerged as the ultimate X factor for North Carolina because he could stretch the defense so much from the power forward position. It opened up more driving lanes for RJ Davis and Caleb Love, and it opened up also more isolation opportunities for Armando Bacot. So without him, Pete Nance, a grad transfer from Northwestern, who is a very, very good player for Northwestern in the Big Ten, almost feels like a square peg in a round hole in terms of how he's fit into that lineup. And ironically enough, when we saw Pete Nance out of the lineup earlier in ACC play and North Carolina started to rotate Puff Johnson and Leaky Black as more of a skilled four-man next to Armando Bacot, the rhythm, the chemistry, the role allocation was better for North Carolina. So North Carolina has blue chip talent. It does not have blue chip chemistry.
What about the coaching questions at Kentucky and Duke? I feel like there's a little bit of a rumbling within Kentucky's fan base that there might be some frustration starting to boil over a little bit with Coach Cal. I mean, have you sensed that at all?
Well, John Calipari is owed, I think, $39 million. So John Calipari is going to be the coach at Kentucky for a long, long time, unless that they write him, obviously, an astronomical check. But I think the one thing we're seeing throughout college basketball is the transfer portal has allowed coaches to think differently in terms of recruiting and building a program. It's almost like the convenience that we all have as everyday citizens with Amazon.com, and it's become an Amazon.com for recruiting, because rather than think about what is going to be the best to maintain program continuity, what is going to be the best to remain chemistry and role allocation, coaches can now go and pick a player who is proven in college basketball and bring them in for a year or two and almost build a team on an annual basis versus building a program. I think that's part of what's happened for Kentucky. Kentucky was a team, if you think about the way it was built initially under John Calipari, that always had blue chip point guard play. John Wall, Brandon Knight, Marcus Teague, Andrew Harrison, Jamal Murray, Tyler Ulis, De'Aaron Fox. And now Kentucky is coming off a year where they had Severe Wheeler at point guard, who's a very, very good player in college. And now they have Cason Wallace at point guard, but the pieces around him don't truly fit.
Who's been the most impactful player, do you think, that has come out of this transfer portal that, as you say, has completely revolutionized the game? Because a lot of college basketball insiders that we speak to go straight to that as a reason why the landscape is so drastically different. Is there a player that comes to mind immediately for you?
Well, ironically enough, and this isn't a segue, but, two players who left Kentucky, Bryce Hopkins, who's thriving right now at Providence, who I think is going to be, an All-American candidate for this year, has been sensational. And I would say also a guy who played for UCLA 2 years ago when they went to the Final Four, Johnny Juzang, who also came from Kentucky, are prime examples of how you can find somebody who is not in a primary role at their previous stop and turn them into stars. And another thing that we're seeing with the transfer portal is it gives obviously coaches more ability to adapt and rebuild rosters on the fly. So if you're a non-blue blood program and you can't get involved with the best high school players in the country, or even some of the best high school players in the country, you have a chance to recalibrate your roster quickly in that fashion. TJ Otzelberger did it last year at Iowa State in his first season in Ames as a head coach. They went to the Sweet 16. They're in position right now in the bracket that I did for today for FanDuel to be a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, all pretty much primarily because of the transfer portal.
There have also been some coaches, John, who have been critical about name, image, and likeness and the effect that that's had on the college game. We're seeing in the NBA an era that's being described as an era of player empowerment, and even across other sports landscapes in the NFL, players have a lot of power and autonomy and platforms more than they ever have.
Yeah.
What do you think has been the biggest effect of name, image, likeness in the game of college basketball?
Name, image, and likeness was long overdue. It should have been put into place a long time ago in college basketball. And the beauty of it is this: if a player does not have a lucrative professional opportunity, he or she can come back to school and make a great living playing college basketball. And what that does for people from the periphery is it allows them to have more identifiable names in the sport year to year instead of these players going to Europe or going to the G League to play. If there was no name, image, and likeness, college basketball wouldn't have Hunter Dickinson. It wouldn't have Oscar Tshiebwe. It wouldn't have Armando Bacot or Trace Jackson Davis. These are all good things for the sport.
How would you assess the job that the Duke coaching staff has done? Mike Krzyzewski leaving an obvious void, but leaving a legacy of some coaches that have been around him for so long, and yet they've struggled this season.
Well, I think one of the big reasons they've struggled is a lack of returning experience. Duke went to the Final Four last year in Coach K's final season. The only player in Duke's program that was a part of the team that played North Carolina in the Final Four was Jeremy Roach. If you look, Carolyn, at the 20 starters that started in last year's Final Four, 17 of them were in their respective programs the season prior. The 3 who weren't were Brady Manick, who we've talked about a little bit earlier with North Carolina, Paolo Banchero, who was a lottery pick, and A.J. Griffin as well for Duke. Roster continuity is the key in college basketball. Duke does not have that. And another thing to keep in mind, when we're seeing now programs use the transfer portal and also use COVID seniors. And what that is the NCAA allowed players to have an extra year of eligibility if they were in school during the 1920 season when the NCAA tournament was canceled. So players now are playing when they're 22, 23, and 24 because they can stay in school and play another year, because they can benefit from name, image, and likeness. And Duke, who brought in a terrific freshman class, now has 18 and 19-year-olds going up against 22, 23, and 24-year-old men. That's a big difference.
We've seen Purdue at the top, John, of college basketball standings for a decent amount of time this season. And yet you get the sense that the landscape, I guess, for a word that, lack of a better word that I keep on using, is a bit more volatile than that. I mean, are they a sure thing in your mind? And if not, what does that mean for the tournament?
Absolutely not. I think we are going to have as chaotic an NCAA tournament as I've covered in nearly 20 years on this beat. It reminds me so much of the 2010-11 season when UConn won a national championship as a 3 seed, but was 9-9 in Big East conference play prior to the NCAA tournament. The other teams in the Final Four of the year was Kentucky, a 4 seed. And on the other side, you had Butler, who was an 8 seed, and VCU, who was an 11 seed. And, obviously Purdue has earned the right to be number 1 and to be positioned for a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. But Purdue, because of what's going on in that program over the last 5 years in terms of the NCAA tournament heartache that program and its fan base have suffered, anything less than making the Final Four will be considered a colossal disappointment. Because you have the National Player of the Year in Zach Edey, because you have a landscape in college basketball that's so balanced across the board, and because of what's happened to Purdue in the NCAA tournament the last 5 years. In 2018, Purdue had a team that could have went to a Final Four. Their starting center, 7'2" big man Isaac Haas, has an elbow injury. They lose to Texas Tech in the Sweet 16. In 2019, They lose to Virginia in overtime in the Elite Eight in a game that they had in hand late, and then Virginia had a miracle play at the end of regulation to send it to overtime. And then last year, Purdue had a team with Zach Edey, with Travion Williams, with Jaden Ivey, a lottery pick, and lost to St. Peter's in the Sweet 16. Unless Purdue makes the Final Four in Houston and is playing on April 1st, the season will be considered a disappointment.
How many teams from the Big 12 do you expect to make the tournament?
I had 8 projected in my bracket today, so there is a real chance that 80% of the Big 12 could make the NCAA tournament.
Is that surprising, the strength and the depth that conference has, or anybody who's been paying attention should know that is a formidable conference?
That's a formidable conference. It's been a formidable conference for a long time. And I think the thing about the Big 12 that's going to be really interesting in the NCAA tournament is such a large portion of this league is going to have exceptionally high seeds in the bracket. This morning, when I did my bracket breakdown, which I forecasted all 68 teams, I do that every Friday for FanDuel, I had 5 teams from the Big 12. Kansas, Texas, Iowa State, Baylor, and also, not TCU, who was the 5th team? Kansas, Texas, Iowa State, Baylor. I'm trying to think right now. I'm lost for words for the first time in my life. Kansas, Texas, Iowa State, Baylor, TCU, all projected as high seeds in the NCAA tournament. And now you're in a situation where the Big 12, could get 5 or 6 of the top 16 seeds in the NCAA tournament. That's fascinating.
Curious to hear your thoughts on Alabama and Houston, who do things drastically differently in terms of scoring. And we've all seen what Kelvin Sampson's done defensively. How legit are both of those teams?
Alabama and Houston are 2 teams that can get to a Final Four and win a national championship. There's no doubt about that. Kansas State's the other team in the Big 12 that I have in my top 16 seeds. I have to look it up. Alabama's a team that's prolific offensively. Alabama made 15 three-point shots against Florida earlier in the week. They've got a dynamic freshman in Brandon Miller. And again, much like they were in 2021, they are a juggernaut offensively. Houston is a team and a program that has been built off Kelvin Sampson's relentlessness and toughness and outworking and outwilling their opponent. But this is pound for pound, inch for inch, the most talented team that he has had since he's been the head coach at Houston. Marcus Sasser is an All-American at guard. Jarris Walker is a potential lottery pick. And the players in between, Jamal Shedd, Tremont Mark, Jaywan Roberts, all really, really good college players. So Houston is more built on talent than it is, I think, on the toughness and the chemical DNA that we've seen Kelvin Sampson overachieve with. The ceiling is higher for the Cougars this year than it's been recently under Kelvin Sampson.
I'm sure a lot of people, if they get a chance to meet you or on social media, always ask you for mid-majors that you like, Cinderellas you like, surprises, especially as we get closer to March. Can you give us a couple of those? Are there some teams that we should be paying attention to right now that might be a little bit under the radar?
Yeah, I mean, I think the mid-major label is obviously different because we really only have 6 leagues, and then, everything else kind of classifies as a mid-major. Now, I love Akron if they can win the MAC because of the 1-2 punch of Xavier Castaneda and Enrique Freeman. Santa Barbara's a team out of the Big West that improved to 19-4 on Thursday night. They have a guard in A.J. Mitchell that can play anywhere in college basketball. And St. Mary's, despite losing on Thursday night to Loyola Marymount, is a team that's very methodical, is a team that's very deliberate, and it almost is kind of like playing Wisconsin years ago when Bo Ryan was the coach.
Just last question for you on Texas and their coaching situation. Their interim head coach, Ronnie Terry, was put in a really difficult situation. Do you see him sticking around? And what do you forecast for the future of the head coaching job there?
Ronnie Terry has done a tremendous job, I would say, in crisis management, considering the fact that, this team was obviously left without its head coach in the middle of the season, and the way he's navigated that. And we were discussing this in, without question, the best conference in college basketball. It would take a performance with a regular season finish at the top of the Big 12 standings and a performance of Texas getting to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, I think, for Rodney Terry to remain Texas's permanent head coach. But if he is not Texas's permanent head coach, he should be a head coach somewhere again next season. This guy, remember, was the head coach previously at UTEP and Fresno State, led Fresno State years ago to the NCAA tournament, beating San Diego State for the Mountain West Tournament Championship.
Just a couple questions for you personally, Jon, before I let you go. A lot of people know that you're something of a foodie. Pasta Sunday has trended, and follow what you do, which I think is really fun. Pasta Sunday, I'm assuming, gets put on pause for the Super Bowl. And as a follow-up to that, if you could have dinner, if you could have Pasta Sunday with 3 college basketball coaches, who would you, past or present, who would you have dinner with?
Great question. Pasta Sunday with 3 college basketball coaches. You know, I probably wouldn't feel like I was overeating if Matt Painter and Bob Huggins were there, because I'm sure they could go, toe to toe with me. And if I had to pick a third, that's a great question. Greg can't be at Oakland. He's always down for a good meal.
Are you surprised or delighted by how you've been able to connect with the college basketball fan base, because they love you? And I say that knowing that so many media outlets want authenticity. I mean, they want people that actually have a fan base that follows what they do and pays attention, and you have that.
Yeah, I mean, Carolyn, you've been in the business for a long time, so you understand, I think, what I'm about to say. I think that being authentic and being who you are and having no change from the way we're talking right now, or if we were talking with a group of people at a bar, is imperative to longevity and long-term success. And also, in obviously trying to carve out space in the space when I was starting my career, I kind of knew as a non-player, as a non-coach, you have to obviously separate yourself more than just having, perspective, insight, news, and information. News, obviously, in the social media era is going to come and go like a vapor in terms of getting a news story. And I think, you should, if you're a non-player or coach, always focus on the news and bringing a broader perspective. But there has to be other things to differentiate yourself. Otherwise, you're just somebody that's doing what everybody else is doing.
Just lastly for you, who is the coach that has surprised you or been most interesting to you that you've met over the course of your career, where they seem to be one thing and they were another? I mean, is there anybody that has really resonated with you deeply in that way?
Yeah, Jim Calhoun. Jim Calhoun, obviously was, a vicious competitor on the sidelines and just had relentless demand of his players when he was at UConn, and off the court, entertaining, kind, funny, just like a really, really warm guy off the court. But, when things were obviously getting going during practice or during games, he was a different person. He was almost like, if there was 24 hours in a day, for 2 hours, he was like the last person you would want to drive from New York to DC with if you were in the car with him for those 2 hours. And for 22 other hours, he was pleasant.
All right, Jon, thank you for the time. I've kept you for too long. CBS Sports and also FanDuel, we talked a little bit about what you're doing every week there leading up to the NCAA tournament. Where's the easiest way for people to find you? I'm assuming social media is probably the best.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Jon Rothstein. That's Jon, Jon.
All right, thanks, Jon. Appreciate it.